Let's talk about potassium sulfate.
Yeah, so potassium is a interesting element in the fact that the plants need it in abundance. It is a macronutrient. It's responsible for the opening and closing of the guard cells. It is responsible for sodium ion pumps for to make diffusion work across cellular membranes. It helps with water transport because those guard cells on the stomata, they open and up and allow for transportation of nutrients and water throughout that system. Potassium is responsible for that system. It's got a bunch of different things that it does. However, potassium comes from mineral appetites. It usually comes from minerals, right? And it is not typically in abundance in conventional agriculture soils, outdoor soils. Most of the land that we see isn't really super fertile. Like you would have to remediate it before you could grow crops, or you have to use fertigation techniques and crop covers and add carbon, whatever. So when it comes to potassium sulfate, it is a mineral sulfate. It's a naturally occurring mineral that allows us to get that much needed element really quickly when we need it. Now, there are a couple of different things that I use for potassium. Now, potassium comes in a couple of different ways, typically in soil. So composts, it comes in composts and not in huge quantities. We're usually maybe 2-3% potassium when we're talking about composts, and those are all slow release. Now, potassium I see used is probably the number 2 element, especially in heavy fruiting and medicinal plants. Heavy fruiting vegetable varieties, I mean, we need a lot of it. It needs a lot of potassium. A lot of these plants do. So we can get it from potassium sulfate. Another one is potassium silica is what I like, is another thing that I use, which is the trade name AgSil16. It's essentially potash and sand heated up really hot together. It's mixed together. And it's a water-soluble form of both potassium and silica and monosalicylic acid in that form. So it is a available form and it's the least expensive form of silica. So if you're using a silica amendment, this is by far the most cost-effective way to get silica in. It has it's got 32% potassium by volume, so you can use small amounts to get the potassium that you need, and it is water soluble, so you can mix it into a fertigation tank and water it in. You can also foliar apply AgSil16 potassium silica, and it works really, really well because it changes the pH of the water. It makes it really high. So if you're using it as a foliar application, it'll change that. It'll temporarily change the phytosphere of the plant, which a lot of pathogens don't like that, so it can be used as a fungicide in that respect, while also adding the potassium and the silica, which is available to the plant as a spray as well. The potassium sulfate, depending on how much it's processed, and what I mean by processing is they'll micronize it, they'll grind it up, so you can get it in chunks. And the benefit of having chunks is that you can get it as a top dress and just kind of leave it in there as your top dress, and as you water in, it'll slowly release over time when you have higher granulars. Also, if it's a granular form of potassium sulfate and you're using that in like a soil mix, the benefit is that it'll be a slow release, but it'll also add pore space, and so that'll help with water penetration throughout that soil system if it's a granular. It also comes in fully water soluble form, so that way you can add it to a reservoir or you can water it in. And again, because it is a mineral sulfate, it's going to be metabolically available. So you can use this to quickly adjust levels. Like, so if I were to get a soil test back and I saw that somebody's potassium was low, my go-to is usually going to be potassium sulfate or AgSil16. There are other things that contain potassium, like green sand, right? I've seen people try to use green sand as a potassium amendment, but the problem is this. the release of potassium for green sand is so slow. We're talking about, several months to years for it to become available. So while it does add some component of aeration and a very, very small component of potassium, it's one of those things that is almost just like an extra that you could have in there if you wanted to, and it's not going to hurt. It's not going to really affect anything. But it's not something that I could, recommend as as an agronomist and say, hey, this is what you should be using to try to get your system back into sufficiency, because it just doesn't add the amount that's going to be needed to bring it up in an adequate amount of time.
This clip is brought to you by AC Infinity. Use discount code MrGrow at 15 to save on any of their products.